You want to hear a story about a man who thought money made him untouchable? All right, sit down. Let me tell you about the morning a $30 million millionaire walked into my courtroom and said, "This court can't touch me." 2 hours later, he left in handcuffs, learning that, in America, justice has very long arms. The file that came across my desk that Wednesday morning made my hands shake. Marcus Wellington III versus State of Rhode Island. But it wasn't a civil matter. This was criminal. When I opened that folder and read the first line, my heart sank. Vehicular homicide. Elena Rodriguez, age 8, deceased. I've been on this bench for over 40 years, and you think you've seen every kind of heartbreak. Then a case like this lands on your desk, and you remember why we do this job. The name Wellington meant something in this city. Pharmaceutical fortune, luxury hotels, political donations that opened doors. But when I read what their son had done, what the father had tried to cover up, I knew this was going to test everything I believed about justice and mercy. Here's what I learned from the police reports that Detective Murphy brought to my chambers. The Rodriguez family, Miguel, a carpenter, his wife Sophia, who cleaned offices at night, and their twin daughters, Maria and Elena, were driving home from Rhode Island Hospital, where little Maria had just finished her final chemotherapy treatment for leukemia. Can you imagine? After 18 months of fighting cancer, they finally got the news every parent prays for. Maria was in remission. They celebrated with ice cream at Elena's favorite restaurant. Detective Murphy told me later that the last thing Elena said to her sister was, "We'll never be apart." They were driving home, probably planning Maria's cancer-free party, when Marcus Wellington IV decided downtown Providence was his personal racetrack. The impact report I read made me sick to my stomach. 80 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. Blood alcohol, 0.15. Cocaine in his system. Elena died on impact. Maria went into a coma that lasted 3 weeks. Miguel's spine was shattered. Sophia lost her left arm. But what really got to me, what made this case personal, was what happened next. I found out later from testimony, from recordings, from witnesses who finally found the courage to speak up. Instead of calling 911, this kid called his daddy. And instead of rushing to help that family, Marcus Wellington III went into cover-up mode. The evidence that came out during the trial painted a picture that still makes me angry. Detective Murphy testified about how fast Wellington's legal team appeared at the crash scene. Faster than the ambulance, he told the court. While that little girl was dying, lawyers were coaching the son on what to say to the police. During the hearing, I listened to phone recordings that the FBI had obtained. Wellington is hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on the Rodriguez family. The investigators filed reports that I read myself. They couldn't find a single piece of dirt on this hard-working family. Miguel Rodriguez worked in construction for 15 years, never missed a day. Sophia cleaned offices at 3 different buildings every night to help pay for Maria's cancer treatments. These people were saints, and Wellington was trying to destroy them. But the recordings got worse. I heard Wellington's voice offering bribes to witnesses. Tommy Martinez, who worked at the restaurant that served Wellington's son that night, testified that Wellington offered him a job managing one of his hotels if he'd say the kid seemed sober. The valet attendant, Carlos Santos, told the court that Wellington showed up at his apartment with cash, trying to get him to change his story about how erratically the Ferrari was being driven when it left the parking garage. Then came the hospital visit, and I'll never forget Nurse Patricia Williams' testimony about this.
A millionaire walked into my courtroom and said, "This court can't touch me." 2 hours later, he left in handcuffs. Facing the law, he thought he could be while an 8-year-old girl was dead, her family shattered, and he tried to cover it up. Justice caught him. No money, no influence could stop it.
She was working the ICU that night when Wellington showed up, not as a concerned citizen, but as a businessman trying to close a deal. While Miguel was unconscious, while Sophia was in surgery to save what was left of her arm, Wellington was pressuring the family's translator to get them to sign legal papers. Maria Gonzalez, the hospital translator, broke down crying on the witness stand, which he told the court what Wellington said to Miguel while he lay there with pins holding his spine together. Listen, accidents happen in cities like this. My son feels terrible, but these things, they occur when people drive older cars without modern safety features. I can offer your family $50,000 to resolve this quietly, without putting everyone through a long legal process. $50,000. The man spent more than that on his wine collection every year. For Elena's life, for Miguel's back, for Sophia's arm, for Maria's brain injury. $50,000. I watched Sophia Rodriguez in the gallery, which she heard that testimony replayed. She was crying, but she was also angry. She whispered something to her attorney, Patricia Santos, and I could read her lips. He thought we were for sale. When I learned they'd refused his blood money and hired Santos to represent them, Wellington got desperate. The FBI recordings showed him calling Detective Murphy at home, offering him what he called consulting opportunities with Wellington Industries if certain pieces of evidence went missing from the case file. Murphy testified that Wellington specifically mentioned the Ferrari's black box data and the toxicology results from his son. When Murphy refused and reported the bribery attempt, Wellington tried a different approach. City Councilman Roberts testified under immunity that Wellington called him directly, offering a $100,000 contribution to his re-election campaign if he could influence the prosecutor's office to handle this matter administratively rather than criminally. The most sickening testimony came from Dr. Jennifer Kim, the trauma surgeon who treated Maria after the crash. She told the court that Wellington actually hired his own medical experts to review Maria's cancer treatment records, trying to build a case that her previous chemotherapy had somehow made her more vulnerable to brain injury. Think about that. This man was so desperate to protect his son that he tried to blame a widow girl's cancer treatment for the brain damage his drunk son caused by driving 80 miles per hour through downtown Providence. When Dr. Kim testified about this, I had to call a recess. 40 years on this bench, and I never heard anything so cruel. During that recess, I sat in my chambers and thought about Elena, 8 years old, just happy that her twin sister had beaten cancer. The last thing she ever said was, "We'll never be apart." But Wellington was trying to turn even that tragedy into a legal strategy. But Wellington's arrogance finally caught up with him when Detective Murphy brought me those recordings. I remember sitting in my chambers that Thursday evening, listening to this man try to bribe city officials to make a dead child go away. The recordings were crystal clear. Wellington's voice, confident and casual, talking about Elena Rodriguez like she was a business problem to be solved with the right amount of money. I had to take off my glasses and rub my eyes. In 40 years on this bench, I'd seen plenty of corruption, but this felt different. This felt evil.
Marcus Wellington III entered the courtroom confident that wealth would shield him. His son had caused a tragic accident, killing an 8-year-old girl. Attempt at bribery and witness intimidation failed. The court ensured accountability, proving that justice applies to everyone.
Here was a man with every advantage in life: education, wealth, connections, opportunities most people only dream about. And he was using all of it to escape accountability for his son's crime. Judge Caprio, Detective Murphy said, and I could see he was shaken too. I've been a cop for 22 years. I've arrested murderers, drug dealers, gang members. But this is different. This man thinks he can buy his way out of killing a child. I thought about widow Elena then, 8 years old, just happy that her twin sister had beaten cancer. She'd never see 9, never start 4th grade, never learn to ride a bike without training wheels. And this man was treating her death like a business problem to be solved with money and influence. The morning Wellington walked into my courtroom, I knew we were in for something special. It was Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. sharp, and in he comes, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people make in 6 months. Behind him walked 3 lawyers, not just any lawyers, but the kind of legal talent that charges $1,000 an hour and specializes in making rich people's problems disappear. Christina announced his name: Marcus Wellington III, conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice. But what struck me wasn't his expensive clothes or his high-powered legal team. It was his attitude. This man carried himself like he was doing us all a favor by showing up, like this was some administrative inconvenience that would be resolved quickly with the right phone calls and campaign contributions. I could see him looking around my courtroom, probably calculating how much influence he'd need to buy to make this go away. He glanced at the Rodriguez family supporters in the gallery like they were furniture he was considering having removed. When I called his case, Wellington approached my bench with the confidence of someone who'd never really faced consequences for anything. His lead attorney whispered something to him, probably reminding him to show respect. But Wellington just adjusted his gold watch like he was checking how much of his valuable time this would waste. Mr. Wellington, I began, looking at this man who thought his money made him special. Your son killed Elena Rodriguez. He nearly killed her whole family. But you're here because you tried to bribe witnesses and intimidate victims. Do you understand these charges? Your Honor, he said, and I could hear that tone rich people use when they think they're talking to the help. There's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my family's involvement in this unfortunate incident. A dead child was an incident to him. Mr. Wellington, your son was drunk, doing 80 in a 30 zone. That's not an incident, that's murder. Your Honor, young people, they make poor decisions with alcohol. That doesn't mean we should destroy a promising young man's future over what amounts to a tragic accident. What about Elena's future? He paused. For just a second, I thought maybe I saw something human in his eyes. But then, Your Honor, I sympathize with the Rodriguez family's loss, but prosecuting my son won't bring their daughter back. And offering them $50,000 while they were in intensive care, was that sympathy? Your Honor, I offered financial assistance during a difficult time. That's compassion, not bribery. $50,000 for their daughter's life. I offered compensation for their pain and suffering. It's normal in civil cases. While they were sedated in the hospital, his lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, my client was providing immediate assistance to a family in crisis. I played the recording then. Wellington's own voice.
He thought he was untouchable. He said it. This court can't touch me. His son killed a little girl, his family destroyed, and he tried bribery. Wrong move. 5 years in prison. 10 million for victims. Wealth doesn't beat the law. Never has, never will.
Filled my courtroom. Bob, my son made a mistake, but he's a good kid. The Rodriguez family, they're just looking for a payday. $100,000 to your campaign should ensure this gets handled quietly. You could hear a pin drop when that recording ended. Mr. Wellington, that was you trying to bribe Councilman Roberts. Your Honor, that was a private conversation about legitimate political contributions. You mentioned the Rodriguez situation specifically. I mentioned the need for officials to handle complex cases with appropriate consideration. I stood up. Mr. Wellington, you think wealth gives you the right to corrupt justice? Your Honor, and now his voice was shaking. People who contribute to this community, we deserve consideration. We create jobs. We pay taxes. And if you don't get the consideration you want to buy, Your Honor, you're twisting my words. I'm explaining economic realities that municipal judges might not understand. Municipal judges, like I was beneath him. That's when he said it. Frankly, Your Honor, this court can't touch me. I have connections, financial resources, legal representation that costs more per hour than most people make in a month. The courtroom went silent. This man had just declared himself above the law. Mr. Wellington, I said, and I had to pause for a moment because my voice was shaking with anger. Did you just tell this court that we can't touch you? I told you the reality, he said, but now I could see sweat on his forehead. People like me, we don't go to prison. We resolve issues through appropriate channels. I thought about my father then. He came to this country with nothing, worked 3 jobs to give his children a chance at justice. And here was this man telling me that justice was for sale. Mr. Wellington, you think wealth makes you untouchable? I think wealth creates responsibilities that require flexibility from public servants. And if you don't get the flexibility you want to buy, Your Honor, you're twisting. I'm explaining economic realities. I looked at Sofia Rodriguez in the gallery. She was holding a photo of Elena. That little girl would never grow up, never graduate, never have children of her own, because this man's son thought streets were his playground. Mr. Wellington, I said, I'm going to show you what this court can't touch. 5 years federal prison. His son got 15 for vehicular homicide. $10 million forfeiture for a victim compensation fund. No special treatment, no wealthy prisoner accommodations. Wellington's face went white. His expensive lawyers started scribbling appeals that would never work. You can't do this. I have rights. I have connections. Mr. Wellington, you had rights until you chose to corrupt them. This is insane. You're destroying a businessman over an accident. As they handcuffed him, he kept yelling about his wealth, his importance. But it meant nothing next to Elena's life. After they took him away, Sofia Rodriguez came up to my bench. She'd been watching from the gallery. Your Honor, she said, and she was crying, thank you for showing that Elena mattered more than his money. Mrs. Rodriguez, I told her, your daughter's life matters more than all the money in the world. You know what I learned from that case? The aftermath was almost as important as the trial itself. 2 years later, I got a letter from Miguel Rodriguez that I keep in my desk drawer. He wrote it himself, in careful English that took him months to practice with a tutor from Catholic Charities. Judge Caprio, the letter said, Wellington's conviction didn't bring Elena back,
Listen to this. Marcus Wellington III thought money made him untouchable. His son killed an 8-year-old, family in ruins, and he tried to bribe witnesses. 2 hours later, handcuffs. 5 years prison. 10 million to victims. Boom. Justice wins, no matter how rich you are.
Prove that in America, justice can still reach anyone, even people who think they're too rich to touch. My wife and I watch the news sometimes, and we see rich people getting away with terrible things. But when we remember your courtroom, when we remember Wellington in handcuffs, we have hope that our daughter's death meant something. That letter meant more to me than any commendation or award I've ever received. Because that's why we do this job. Not for the headlines or the recognition, but for the moments when justice actually reaches someone who thought they were untouchable. Sophia Rodriguez came to see me 6 months after the trial. She'd learned to use a prosthetic arm, was back to work part-time, and had started volunteering with other families who'd lost children to drunk drivers. She told me something I'll never forget. Judge, when Wellington offered us that money in the hospital, I was so angry I couldn't speak. Not because the amount was insulting, but because he thought Elena's life was something we'd sell. Maria, the twin sister who survived, came with her mother that day. She was doing better. The brain injury had healed more than doctors expected, though she still had some memory problems. But what struck me was what she said. Judge Caprio, my sister Elena visits me in dreams sometimes. She says she's happy that bad man went to jail for what he did to our family. The Victim Compensation Fund that Wellington's forfeiture money created helped 37 families over the next 5 years. I got updates on every case. Drunk driving victims, families hurt by wealthy people who thought their money could buy them out of consequences. That fund meant that other families wouldn't have to choose between medical bills and justice, wouldn't have to accept insulting settlements because they couldn't afford to fight people like Wellington. But maybe the most important outcome was what happened to Wellington himself. I heard from prison officials that he spent his first year in federal lockup still trying to buy special treatment, offering commissary money to other inmates for protection, trying to use his outside connections to get transferred to a minimum security facility. None of it worked. In federal prison, a badge number is just a badge number, whether you're in for robbing banks or bribing city officials. Wellington learned what every other convict learns, that when you're wearing prison clothes, your net worth doesn't matter to anyone. His son, Marcus IV, got out after serving 8 years of his 15-year sentence. I heard from his probation officer that the kid had completely changed, went to AA meetings every day, volunteered at a trauma center, wrote letters to drunk driving victims. Sometimes prison actually works the way it's supposed to. But the father? Wellington served every day of his 5-year sentence. No early release, no compassionate consideration, no special treatment. When he got out, he was a different man, financially ruined by legal fees and forfeitures, politically irrelevant, socially shunned by the same wealthy circles that used to kiss his ring. I saw him once at a grocery store about a year after his release. He was by himself, pushing a cart, looking like any other customer. When he saw me, he stopped, and for a moment, I thought he might say something, but he just nodded once and walked away. Maybe that was his way of saying he finally understood that money can't buy you out of every problem. My father always told me, Frank, money is a tool, not a master. When you think wealth makes you untouchable, you discover justice has very long arms. Wellington learned that those arms were long enough to reach him in federal prison, where his $30 million meant nothing. He learned that saying, "This court can't touch me," is the fastest way to guarantee that it will. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, this court can touch anyone who thinks they're above the law. Thanks for listening, and God bless.
He walked in confident, $30 million behind him, thinking he was above the law. A young girl lay dead, her family devastated, and he tried to manipulate justice. But the law held firm. Showing wealth cannot shield crime. 5 years in prison. $10 million for victims, a solemn reminder that justice is blind.